If you've been told that the only way to lose belly fat is to starve yourself, cut everything you enjoy, or live in the gym, I need you to stop right there. Because we're not talking about just any fat here. We're talking about visceral fat, the deep, dangerous fat that wraps around your organs. And here's what nobody tells you: it's not about willpower, it's not even really about calories, it's about hormones. And in the next 20 minutes, I'm going to show you exactly how to shrink visceral fat by working with your biology instead of fighting it. Stay with me because this changes everything. I'm Dr. Megan Foster. I've been a surgeon for 24 years, and I've watched hundreds of patients struggle with belly fat that won't budge no matter how hard they try. They eat less, they exercise more, and somehow their waistline doesn't get the message. And I see the frustration. I see the self blame. But here's the truth: it's not your fault. Nobody explained the biology to you. Nobody told you that visceral fat is hormonally active and responds to completely different signals than the fat under your skin. And once you understand those signals, everything changes. Before we go any further, if understanding how to actually lose belly fat without extreme dieting sounds valuable to you, hit that subscribe button right now. This channel is all about science based health strategies that work in real life. No hype, no impossible rules, just real solutions backed by real research. So, subscribe and let's dive in. Here's the core insight that changes the game: visceral fat doesn't respond to punishment, it responds to hormonal signals, specifically insulin. When insulin is high and stays elevated for long periods, your body preferentially stores fat in your abdomen, around your liver, around your intestines, deep in your belly. And when insulin stays chronically elevated, that visceral fat becomes extremely difficult to mobilize and burn. But when you control insulin exposure, when you reduce how often and how long insulin stays high, visceral fat is often the first fat to shrink, not because you're eating less, because you're changing the signals. And that's what this video is about. I'm going to give you 7 research-backed strategies that control those signals. These aren't theories. These are interventions that have been tested in clinical trials, and they work. Not overnight, not magically, but consistently. And by the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly how to apply them starting today. Let me start with the most important one, the one that most people completely miss. It's insulin control, and I need you to understand this clearly because it's the foundation of everything else. Visceral fat is exquisitely sensitive to insulin, more so than subcutaneous fat, the fat under your skin. When insulin levels are high, visceral fat storage is favored. Your body is getting a signal that says, store energy here, in the abdomen. And when insulin stays elevated throughout the day because you're constantly eating, snacking, or consuming foods that spike blood sugar repeatedly, that signal never turns off. Now, insulin is not the enemy. Insulin is a necessary hormone. You need it to live. But chronic insulin exposure, that's the problem. Highly refined carbohydrates eaten frequently throughout the day keep insulin elevated. Constant snacking keeps insulin elevated. Late night eating keeps insulin elevated. And when insulin is always on, visceral fat accumulates and refuses to leave. But here's the important part: lowering insulin isn't about eliminating food or going on some extreme low carb diet where you can't eat anything. It's about reducing how often insulin spikes and how long it stays elevated. You can eat the same number of calories and get a completely different hormonal response just by changing what you eat, when you eat it, and how you structure your meals. Same food intake, different fat storage outcome. Studies looking at insulin sensitivity consistently show that when people improve their insulin response through diet and lifestyle changes, they preferentially lose visceral fat compared to subcutaneous fat. That deep belly fat shrinks faster than fat anywhere else. Your body actually wants to let go of visceral fat because it's metabolically expensive and inflammatory, but it can't do that when insulin is constantly signaling to store. So how do you lower insulin exposure? That brings us to strategy number 2. And this one is so simple yet so powerful. Eat protein first. Before you think about eating less, think about eating protein first at every meal. Protein sends a strong satiety signal to your brain. It tells you that you're fed, and it does this more effectively than carbohydrates or fats. When you start a meal with protein, you naturally eat fewer total calories without even trying. Not because you're forcing yourself, because your appetite hormones, ghrelin and leptin, shift in your favor. But protein does something else that's crucial for visceral fat. It reduces the post-meal insulin spike. When you eat protein before or with carbohydrates, the glucose response is lower and the insulin response is more controlled. You're getting the same nutrition, but with less hormonal disruption. And protein preserves lean muscle mass, which is metabolically active tissue. The more muscle you have, the higher your resting metabolic rate. You're burning more calories at rest. And muscle tissue is insulin sensitive, which means it pulls glucose out of your bloodstream efficiently, reducing the need for high insulin. This is why higher protein diets consistently outperform low fat diets for visceral fat loss in randomized controlled trials. Same calorie deficit, different macronutrient composition, and the higher protein group loses more visceral fat. The mechanism is hormonal, and I'm not talking about massive portions of protein. I'm talking about prioritizing it, making it the anchor of your meals instead of letting carbs or snacks lead. If you're having a meal, start with the protein. Eat your chicken, your fish, your eggs, your tofu, your legumes first, then move to vegetables. Then, if you're still hungry, have your starch. This simple sequence changes everything about how your body responds to that meal. And if you're finding this helpful so far, do me a favor and hit that like button right now. It helps this video reach more people who need it, and drop a comment telling me what your biggest struggle is with belly fat. I read every comment and I want to hear from you. All right, let's talk about timing, because when you eat might be just as important as what you eat. This is strategy number 3, meal timing and circadian biology. Your body is not the same machine at 8 in the morning as it is at 10 at night. Your insulin sensitivity, your ability to handle glucose efficiently, changes throughout the day. In the morning, you are more insulin sensitive. Your muscles and liver are primed to take up and store glucose. But as the day progresses, especially in the evening, insulin sensitivity declines. And at night, when melatonin starts to rise, insulin secretion gets suppressed and glucose handling worsens. What this means is that eating the exact same meal at different times of day produces different metabolic outcomes. A large carbohydrate-heavy meal in the morning will be handled more efficiently than the exact same meal at 9 or 10 at night. And research backs this up. Studies have shown that late eating, independent of total calorie intake, disproportionately increases visceral fat accumulation. Same calories, different timing, different location of fat storage. This is why finishing dinner about 3 hours before sleep can make such a dramatic difference. You're aligning your eating with your body's natural metabolic rhythm. You're giving your body time to process and digest before sleep when metabolic activity slows down. And you're avoiding that late-night insulin spike that signals visceral fat storage. One of my patients simply shifted her eating window. She stopped eating after 7 p.m. Same foods, same amounts, just earlier. And within a month, her waist circumference started shrinking noticeably. She wasn't hungry. She wasn't deprived. She was just working with her biology instead of against it. Now, this doesn't mean you have to do intermittent fasting or skip breakfast or follow some rigid eating schedule. It just means being mindful. Have a good breakfast, have a solid lunch, keep dinner reasonable, and finish it early enough that you're not going to bed on a full stomach. And if you're someone who snacks constantly throughout the day, consider consolidating your eating into more defined meal times with gaps in between. Those gaps give insulin a chance to come down. They give your body a break from constant digestion, and they create a hormonal environment where fat burning can actually happen. Let's move to strategy number 4, and this one is probably the easiest intervention you can make with one of the biggest impacts. Post-meal movement. You don't need intense exercise. You don't need to go to the gym. You don't need to do anything extreme. Just walk for 10 to 15 minutes after you eat. That's it. And the effect on visceral fat is remarkable. When you move after eating, your muscles start pulling glucose out of your bloodstream to use as fuel. They're acting like sponges, soaking up blood sugar. And when glucose is being used by muscles, it's not floating around in your blood-triggering insulin. Your pancreas doesn't have to pump out as much insulin to deal with that meal. And lower insulin means less signal to store visceral fat. Studies using continuous glucose monitors have shown over and over that a short walk after meals dramatically reduces post-meal glucose spikes. We're talking 20 to 30% reductions just from 10 minutes of gentle walking. And there's something specific happening in your calves. There's a muscle called the soleus, and it's incredibly metabolically active. When you're walking, even slowly, that muscle is contracting and using glucose at a high rate. Some researchers have called it a metabolic sink because it just pulls in blood sugar. And this effect compounds over time. When you walk after meals consistently, you're training your body to handle glucose more efficiently. You're improving insulin sensitivity. You're reducing inflammation. And you're specifically targeting the hormonal signals that drive visceral fat storage. This isn't about burning calories through exercise. This is about redirecting fuel. Instead of that post-meal glucose spike, signaling your liver and abdominal fat to store energy, you're redirecting that glucose into muscle tissue where it's used immediately. Same meal, different metabolic fate. And honestly, if I could get every single person watching this to do one thing, it would be this: walk after you eat, especially after dinner, even if it's just around your house or your neighborhood, even if it's slow and easy. Do it consistently and watch what happens to your waistline. Now, let's talk about food quality because this is strategy number 5, and it's something that gets overlooked in the calorie counting obsession. Not all calories behave the same way in your body. Ultra processed foods, the kind that come in packages with ingredient lists you can't pronounce, these foods are rapidly absorbed. They spike insulin hard and they promote inflammation. And inflammation is a major driver of visceral fat accumulation and insulin resistance. Think of it this way: whole foods are like logs on a fire, they burn slowly and steadily. Ultra processed foods are like sawdust, they flare up fast and burn out. Same energy on paper, very different metabolic response. When you eat whole foods, foods with fiber intact, foods that are closer to their natural state, digestion is slower. Glucose is released gradually, insulin spikes are smaller and more controlled, and your body has time to process and use that energy instead of panicking and storing it as fat. Fiber is absolutely critical here. Fiber slows gastric emptying. It feeds your beneficial gut bacteria. It produces short-chain fatty acids like butyrate that improve insulin sensitivity and reduce inflammation. And studies looking at long-term fat loss consistently show that higher fiber intake is associated with greater reductions in visceral fat, independent of total calories. The quality of your food matters. 100 calories from an apple with fiber is not the same as 100 calories from apple juice without fiber. The hormonal response is completely different. So what does this mean practically? It means choosing less processed options when you can. Brown rice over white rice, whole fruit over fruit juice, intact grains over refined flour products, vegetables, legumes, nuts, seeds, foods that come from the earth, not a factory. And when you do eat something processed, pair it with whole foods, add vegetables, add protein, buffer the impact. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be aware and make better choices most of the time. And this brings us to something that quietly sabotages everything. Something that people don't want to talk about but absolutely have to address if they're serious about losing visceral fat. It's strategy number 6, stress and cortisol. Visceral fat has a very high density of cortisol receptors. Cortisol is your stress hormone. And when you're chronically stressed, when cortisol is elevated day after day, your body gets a signal to store fat centrally in your abdomen. This is a survival mechanism. In our evolutionary past, chronic stress usually meant famine or danger. And the body responds by holding on to energy in the form of visceral fat because that's the most accessible energy depot. But in modern life, chronic stress doesn't come from famine. It comes from work pressure, financial worry, relationship conflict, poor sleep, constant digital stimulation. Your body doesn't know the difference. Stress is stress. And high cortisol drives visceral fat accumulation. I've had patients who are doing everything right with their diet. They're eating clean, they're exercising, their calories are in check, but their belly fat won't budge. And when we dig into their life, they're sleeping 4 or 5 hours a night. They're working 70-hour weeks. They're anxious all the time. Their cortisol is through the roof, and no amount of dietary perfection is going to overcome that hormonal environment. This is why managing stress isn't optional, it's essential. And it's not just about feeling better emotionally, although that matters too. It's about creating a hormonal environment where your body feels safe enough to let go of stored fat. Improving sleep quality alone has been shown to reduce abdominal fat independent of calorie intake. Just sleeping better, 7 to 8 hours of quality sleep, consistent sleep schedule, dark, cool room. That changes your cortisol patterns. It improves insulin sensitivity, it regulates appetite hormones, and visceral fat starts to shrink. And stress management doesn't have to be complicated. It can be 10 minutes of deep breathing, a daily walk in nature, therapy if you need it, meditation, yoga, time with people you love, setting boundaries at work, saying no to things that drain you, whatever helps you feel more grounded and less constantly on edge. These things affect your hormones, they affect inflammation, they affect where your body stores fat. So, as you're working on the nutrition and movement side, don't neglect the stress and sleep side. They're equally important. Now, if you're still with me, if this is making sense and you're starting to see how all these pieces fit together, I want you to do something right now. Subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. Hit that notification bell because I make videos like this every week. Science-based, practical, no BS. Just real information that helps you understand your body and make better choices. Don't miss the next one. Subscribe now. All right, let's talk about strategy number 7. And this one is crucial because it's the mistake that cancels out everything else. Avoiding extreme approaches. Crash dieting, severe calorie restriction, extreme exercise regimens. These approaches might produce rapid weight loss initially, but they come with metabolic consequences that make visceral fat worse in the long run. When you drastically cut calories, your body doesn't just burn fat. It also lowers your resting metabolic rate. It downregulates thyroid hormones. It increases cortisol. It breaks down muscle tissue. And when you inevitably can't sustain that level of restriction and you start eating normally again, the weight comes back. But here's the problem. It doesn't come back the same way it left. Weight cycling, losing and regaining weight repeatedly preferentially increases visceral fat over time. You lose weight from all over, but when it comes back, more of it goes to your abdomen. This is why yo-yo dieting is so metabolically damaging. Every cycle makes it harder. Your muscle mass decreases, your metabolic rate drops, your insulin sensitivity worsens, and visceral fat accumulates. So the lesson here is that slow, steady, sustainable changes always win over extreme short-term interventions. You want to create a lifestyle that you can maintain indefinitely, not a diet that you're counting down the days until you can stop. Moderate calorie deficits, reasonable macronutrient distributions, consistent movement, good sleep, stress management, these are the inputs that create lasting change. And the research backs this up. Studies comparing different weight loss approaches consistently show that moderate, sustainable interventions produce better long-term outcomes than extreme ones. Not just in terms of total weight loss, but specifically in terms of visceral fat reduction and metabolic health improvement. So if you're thinking about going on some crazy restrictive diet because you want results fast, I'm asking you to reconsider. Fast results that don't last are not results, they're setbacks. What you want is slow, steady fat loss that you can maintain. And you want to preserve or even build muscle in the process. That's what creates a metabolic environment where visceral fat can't accumulate. You're insulin sensitive. Your hormones are balanced. Your body feels safe. And fat storage patterns normalize. Now, let me tie all of this together because I've given you a lot of information, and I want to make sure you walk away with a clear action plan. Visceral fat is hormonally driven. It responds to insulin, cortisol, meal timing, food quality, movement patterns, sleep, and stress. You don't need to do everything perfectly. You don't need to optimize every variable, but you do need to address the major signals. Control insulin by eating less frequently, prioritizing protein, choosing whole foods, and avoiding constant snacking. Time your meals earlier in the day and finish eating well before bed. Walk after meals to redirect glucose into muscle instead of fat. Manage stress and prioritize sleep because cortisol directly drives visceral fat storage. And avoid extreme approaches that crash your metabolism and set you up for rebound weight gain. These strategies are not complicated. They don't require special products or expensive programs. They just require understanding and consistency. And the beautiful thing is, when you do these things, visceral fat is often the first fat to go because your body doesn't want to hold on to it. It's metabolically active and inflammatory. Your body would rather burn it for fuel. But it needs the right hormonal signals to do that. And now you know how to create those signals. Let me tell you what happens when you apply this consistently. Within a few weeks, you'll notice your energy is more stable. You're not crashing in the afternoon. You're not ravenous an hour after eating. Your cravings decrease. Within a month or two, you'll see changes in your waistline. Your clothes fit differently. Your belt needs tightening. And if you're checking metrics, your waist circumference, which is a direct measure of visceral fat, starts coming down. Your fasting insulin improves. Your triglycerides drop. Your HDL, the good cholesterol, goes up. These are all markers of visceral fat reduction and improved metabolic health. And the longer you sustain these habits, the more profound the changes become. Your insulin sensitivity improves. Your inflammatory markers decrease. Your risk of type 2 diabetes, heart disease, fatty liver disease, all of it decreases. Because visceral fat isn't just cosmetic, it's metabolically harmful. It releases inflammatory cytokines. It interferes with insulin signaling. It increases your risk of chronic disease, and when you shrink it, you're not just looking better, you're fundamentally improving your health. So, where do you start? Pick one thing from this video and do it today. Maybe you walk for 10 minutes after dinner tonight. Maybe you make sure your next meal starts with protein. Maybe you commit to finishing dinner by 7 p.m. Just pick one. Do it consistently for a week. Then add another strategy. Build these habits one at a time and watch what happens. And I want to address something because I know some of you are thinking it. What about exercise? What about cardio and weight training? Don't those matter for visceral fat? Absolutely, they do. Exercise, especially resistance training, is incredibly beneficial for building muscle, improving insulin sensitivity, and creating a metabolic environment where visceral fat can't thrive. But here's the thing, you can't out-exercise a bad diet or poor sleep or chronic stress. Exercise is important, but it's one piece of the puzzle. The hormonal and dietary pieces we talked about today, those are the foundation. Get those right first. Then add structured exercise on top, and you'll see even better results. If you want a video specifically on the best types of exercise for visceral fat, let me know in the comments. I can absolutely make that. But for today, I wanted to focus on the dietary and lifestyle factors because those are the ones that most people get wrong, and they're the ones that have the biggest hormonal impact. Now, let's talk about what happens when people lose weight, but their visceral fat doesn't change. This actually happens more often than you'd think. Someone loses 15 or 20 pounds on the scale, but their waist circumference barely budges. They're losing subcutaneous fat, the fat under their skin, but the visceral fat is holding on. Why does this happen? It's usually because they're losing weight through extreme calorie restriction without addressing the hormonal signals. They're eating tiny portions, but those portions are still high glycemic, processed foods. They're skipping meals, which raises cortisol. They're not sleeping. They're stressed. So even though they're creating a calorie deficit, the hormonal environment is still telling the body to hold onto visceral fat. This is why the approach matters just as much as the deficit. You want to lose weight in a way that improves your hormonal profile. Lower insulin, lower cortisol. Higher insulin sensitivity, better sleep, less inflammation. When you do that, visceral fat comes off preferentially. And that's what we're after, not just weight loss. Visceral fat loss specifically. All right, let me give you one more piece of practical advice. Measure your waist circumference, not just your weight. Weight doesn't tell you where fat is stored, but waist circumference is a direct proxy for visceral fat. Get a tape measure. Measure around your belly button. Write it down, then measure again in 4 weeks after applying these strategies. That number is going to tell you way more than the scale will, because you might lose 2 pounds on the scale, but lose 2 inches off your waist. That's visceral fat shrinking. That's metabolic improvement. That's what we care about. It's what we. And one more thing, if you have access to a DEXA scan or other body composition analysis, that's even better. It can tell you exactly how much visceral fat you're carrying and track changes over time. Some people carry a lot, some people carry less, but almost everyone in modern society, especially as we age, accumulates more visceral fat than is healthy. And that's because our lifestyles are perfectly designed to promote it. We eat all day, we eat late, we eat processed foods, we're stressed, we don't sleep, we sit too much, These are all signals for visceral fat accumulation. But you can reverse those signals. You can create a different hormonal environment. And when you do, your body responds. It wants to be healthy. It wants to let go of that inflammatory, metabolically expensive visceral fat. You just have to give it the right inputs. So here's what I want you to do after you finish watching this video. Go to the description and watch the next video I've linked there. It's about one simple habit that dramatically lowers post-meal insulin, and most people are doing it wrong. That video builds directly on what we talked about today and gives you even more specific tactics. Watch it next. It's going to reinforce these concepts and give you more tools. And if you found this valuable, if this gave you clarity and hope and a real plan that you can actually follow, do me two favors. One, share this video with someone who needs it, someone struggling with belly fat, someone who's tried everything and feels defeated. Send them this link. You might change their life. And two, leave a comment right now telling me which strategy you're going to implement first. I want to know. I read every single comment. Tell me what resonated. Tell me what you're going to try. Let's start a conversation. And remember, you're not broken. You're not lazy. You don't lack willpower. You just didn't understand the biology, and now you do. Visceral fat responds to hormonal signals. Insulin, cortisol, meal timing, food quality, movement, sleep, stress. These are the levers, and you control them. Every single day, with every choice you make, you're either sending signals that promote visceral fat storage or signals that promote visceral fat burning. Now you know which signals do what. Now you can choose deliberately. This is empowering. This is hopeful. This is actionable. You can do this. You can shrink visceral fat without starving yourself or living in the gym. You can do it by working with your body instead of fighting it. And it starts today. It starts with the next meal, the next walk, the next choice. You've got this. I believe in you. Now go make it happen. I'll see you in the next video.